On April 15, 1204, 20,000 Christian knights stormed through the gates of Rome, their swords dripping with blood as they charged towards St. Peter's Basilica. Pope Innocent III flees in terror through secret tunnels, while his own blessed warriors burn the Vatican treasury and destroy 1,000 years of sacred relics. This isn't a Muslim invasion or barbarian raid. These are crusaders, soldiers of Christ himself, and they've come to destroy the very heart of Christianity. What if the Fourth Crusade, instead of sacking Constantinople, had turned its fury against Rome itself and shattered the Catholic Church forever? Let me set the scene of what really happened. The Fourth Crusade started like all the others with noble intentions and papal blessing. Pope Innocent III called for Christian warriors to reclaim Jerusalem from Muslim hands. Thousands of knights from France, Germany, and Italy took the cross, ready to fight for God and glory in the Holy Land, but this crusade went wrong from the very beginning. The crusaders couldn't pay the Venetians for their ships to the Holy Land, so they made a devil's bargain. They agreed to help Venice capture the Christian city of Zara in exchange for passage. One Christian city led to another, and before anyone knew what was happening, these supposed holy warriors were marching on Constantinople, the greatest Christian city in the world. On April 13, 1204, the Crusaders did the unthinkable. They stormed Constantinople, slaughtered thousands of Orthodox Christians, looted churches, destroyed priceless artifacts, and carved up the Byzantine Empire like a Christmas turkey. The city that had stood as Christianity's eastern bulwark for 8 centuries was left in ruins. It was such a disaster that many historians call it the real beginning of the end for Christian unity. But here's the thing: the Crusaders justified this horror by claiming the Orthodox Christians were heretics, that they were purify Christianity by destroying the false Eastern Church. The Pope initially condemned the attack, but then quickly changed his tune when he realized it might bring the Orthodox Church under his control. Now, let's flip this nightmare scenario. What if the Crusaders' anger and greed had turned westward instead of eastward? Imagine this alternate timeline. The year is 1203, and the Fourth Crusade is falling apart just like in our history. The Crusaders are broke, angry, and desperate. But instead of the Venetians manipulating them toward Constantinople, a different crisis emerges. Word spreads through the Crusader camps that Pope Innocent III has been secretly negotiating with Muslim leaders, planning to sell Christian lands for gold to fund his political wars in Italy. The rumors aren't entirely true, but they don't need to be. These are men who've left their homes, spent their fortunes, and expected papal support for their holy mission. Instead, they find themselves stranded and betrayed. The French nobles, led by Baldwin of Flanders, and the German knights under Boniface of Montferrat, make a decision that shocks the medieval world. If the Pope has betrayed Christ's mission, then the Pope himself must answer to God's warriors. The march on Rome begins in the winter of 1203. Unlike the historical march on Constantinople, this isn't driven by Venetian greed or political manipulation. This is a furious, desperate army of men who believe they're saving Christianity from corruption. They reconvinced that the papal court has become so wealthy and worldly that it has forgotten its holy mission. As news reaches Rome that 20,000 armed crusaders are marching south through Italy, panic grips the eternal city. Pope Innocent III, the most powerful pope in medieval history, suddenly finds himself facing the very army he blessed. The irony is devastating. The soldiers of Christ are coming to destroy Christ's earthly representative. The siege of Rome begins in March 1204. Unlike Constantinople's massive walls and professional Byzantine army, Rome's defenses are weak and its garrison small. The Pope never imagined he'd need to defend against Christian knights. The city that once ruled the world now faces its greatest crisis since the barbarian invasions. The human drama is incredible. Picture Cardinal Lotario, a close friend of the Pope, standing on the walls of Rome watching an army flying the cross marching towards St. Peter's Basilica. These aren't Muslim invaders or pagan barbarians. These are the Pope's own spiritual sons, and they're coming with fire and sword. On April 15, 1204, just 2 days after Constantinople was sacked in our timeline, Rome falls. The crusaders storm through the gates, and what follows is one of history's most shocking betrayals. Knights who swore to protect Christianity loot the Vatican treasury, burn papal documents that represent centuries of church law, and destroy relics that millions of Christians considered sacred. The Pope himself barely escapes, fleeing south to the protection of Norman kingdoms in southern Italy. But the damage is done. The moral authority of the papacy, built up over centuries, crumbles in a single day. How can you claim to speak for God when God's own warriors have declared you an enemy? The immediate consequences transform Europe overnight. With the Pope in exile and Rome occupied by a rogue crusader army, the entire structure of medieval Christianity collapses. Cardinal bishops across Europe face an impossible choice: support a pope who has been driven from Rome by Christian soldiers, or try to build a new church structure without papal authority. The Holy Roman Emperor seizes the moment. With the Pope powerless, Emperor Otto IV marches into northern Italy claiming direct authority over the church. But he's not the only one with ambitions. The King of France declares that French bishops answer only to him. The English king makes similar claims. Within months, the unified Catholic Church fractures into national churches, each claiming to represent true Christianity. Let's zoom in on the lives that change forever. Brother Francesco of Assisi, who in our timeline becomes Saint Francis after a vision of Christ telling him to rebuild my church, now faces a literal interpretation of that command. With Roman ruins and the papacy scattered, he leads a movement to create a new, humble church based on poverty and service rather than wealth and power. Think about the common people across Europe. For generations, they've been told that the Pope speaks with God's voice. Now they watch Christian knights burning papal palaces and declaring the Pope a traitor to Christ. Faith itself becomes a personal rather than institutional matter, accelerating religious changes that historically won't happen for centuries. The intellectual impact is staggering. The great libraries of the Vatican, containing irreplaceable manuscripts and theological works, go up in flames. Centuries of church law, philosophical debates, and spiritual writings are lost forever. But from this destruction comes something unexpected: a renaissance of religious thinking as scholars across Europe rush to recreate and reimagine Christian doctrine without papal guidance. By 1210, this alternate timeline has created something unprecedented: a Christianity without a central authority. Instead of one pope claiming universal dominion, dozens of bishops and religious leaders compete to define true Christian faith. This creates both chaos and opportunity: religious wars between competing Christian factions, but also incredible innovation in religious thought and practice. The effects ripple far beyond Christianity. Muslim leaders in the Holy Land and Spain watch in amazement as Christianity tears itself apart more completely than any external enemy could achieve. The Reconquista in Spain slows as Christian kingdoms become more concerned with religious civil wars than fighting Muslims. The crusading movement effectively ends. How can you call for holy war when Christians are fighting Christians over who represents Christ? Perhaps most dramatically, this alternate timeline accelerates the rise of secular power. With religious authority fragmented, kings and emperors across Europe assert direct control over their realms without papal interference. The concept of divine right monarchy developed centuries early, as rulers claim they answer only to God, not to any earthly religious authority. The cultural impact transforms art, literature, and architecture. Instead of magnificent Gothic cathedrals built to glorify papal power, this timeline sees the construction of smaller, more personal religious buildings reflecting local spiritual movements. Art becomes less about church hierarchy and more about individual religious experience. By 1300, instead of the powerful medieval papacy we know from history, this timeline features a Europe where Christianity has become almost Protestant in character centuries before the actual Protestant Reformation. Religious authority is personal, local, and constantly debated rather than imposed from Rome, so there you have it, the Fourth Crusade, but turned against the very heart of the church that launched it. One change of direction, one moment of fury pointed westward instead of eastward, creating a timeline where Christianity destroys its own center and emerges transformed beyond recognition. In our timeline, the Fourth Crusade's sack of Constantinople weakened Christianity by dividing East and West forever. But in this alternate history, the sack of Rome doesn't just weaken Christianity, it fundamentally reimagines it, creating a world where religious authority is earned rather than inherited, and where faith becomes a matter of personal conviction rather than institutional command. What do you think? Could Christian knights really have turned against the Pope? Or was their loyalty to the Church too strong? Would Christianity have been stronger or weaker without centralized papal authority? And how might the Protestant Reformation have unfolded in a world where the Catholic Church had already been shattered centuries earlier? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey through Christianity's most shocking what-if, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. We reflipping history every single day here at Sheriff Reactions. Thanks for watching, and remember, history isn't just what happened, it's what could have happened. Let's keep flipping the past together.